We've heard it all a million times. Hollywood is out of ideas. Over the last couple of decades, we've been inundated with a discourse about how homogenous movies are getting. Remakes, reboots, sequels, legacy-quels, twin films, spiritual successors, endless adaptations of the same material. Movie studios seem to be giving us the same stories over and over again. But is this a new phenomenon? And are remakes always a sign of drilling to creative bedrock? Or is this a symptom of an old storytelling adage that no ideas are original? Here on Copycuts, we're going to try to answer these and other questions as we watch the movies that have been remade, rebooted, interpolated, and everything in between. So without further ado, welcome to Copycuts.
It's the same thing over and over again. Every word on the page has already been rewritten. Are we doomed to repeat ourselves? Are there no stories left to tell? Nothing left to say, nothing left to do. No, there's nothing new. Are we just bored? 'Cause the same old story's all you wanna do. I'm pretty sure we're out of ideas.
Welcome to the very first episode of Copycuts. I'm your co-host, Beth.
And I'm your other co-host, Brad.
We've got what might seem like a surprising choice for our first movie today. But before we get into it, we want to take a second to introduce ourselves to you, our listeners, so that you can have an idea of who we are as movie fans and people. So Brad, what is your history with movies?
Yeah, I would say I started becoming a movie fan like when I was in high school. I think there's maybe everybody watches a movie and you enjoy it because it's a movie. When you're a baby and your face is pointed at a screen, you like movies. But I would say an interest in like movies and how they're made specifically, like sort of the process of like filmmaking. I started to get into in high school, and I took like video broadcast classes, which is like a more dignified version of the AV Club. We would make little short films and stuff. And then I pursued that into college, where I majored in some basically film production stuff. I'm a musician. So for a lot of my friends, when we would do, short films or student films, I would do the scores and kind of did a lot of stuff like that. And then there's like this side quest where I went to law school and did some other things for a little bit. But now I'm back to actually editing video again and shooting video and aspire to make films again. I fell out with movies for a little bit there, like kind of during the law school stuff. And I probably just a time thing, but I don't totally know why. And I think too is like I kind of had a disinterest in the conventional way movies are made. And now that I'm watching stuff again, I've become really a big fan of movies again and really big fan of movies that are made in unconventional ways, and like seeing people who make stuff on a shoestring budget or is made just breaking all the rules has become what I'm a big fan of. And so we might not necessarily be covering those kinds of movies, but I think it's interesting just like as an aspiring filmmaker to kind of talk about how do you tell these stories different ways and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, just a passionate fan of the movies. But I'm watching more movies than I maybe ever have in my life, so I'm excited to talk about them. And how did you get into the movies?
Really watching movies with my family growing up, like that was, both of my parents are into very different kinds of movies. And so it was a bonding thing with each of them for very different types of films. My dad is definitely into much more sort of like weird, artsy, but also like classic, like noir. And my mom will just like, she and my grandma both, they love a movie with a happy ending. They want to watch like, a Nancy Meyers or like a comedy of some kind. And, my dad will watch that kind of stuff too, but like my mom is much more into like a sort of accessible movie, if you want to call it that.
A movies, not films.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Which I would say, like in college when I was majoring in that stuff, I did not take. There were two majors. As I'm, this, but
I do, but our listeners don't yet.
Yeah. So Beth and I majored in the same thing.
Yes.
There was film studies and basically film production. Mm-hmm. And I used to be the guy who would be like, I like movies, not films. Now I'm a little more
both
well versed. Yeah. Well, and I also, I don't believe in being a a snob.
Mm-hmm. And also just like putting down other people's taste is like not what we're about here.
No.
So I grew up watching films and movies with my family. And then I will say one of the things that really sort of like attached me to movies for life is there's this one movie that my friends in high school and I would watch like every single time we had a sleepover. It's Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. It is very like teenage girl coming of age, like Kat Dennings, Michael Cera, lots of like fun, weird characters, very quotable, especially if you've seen it as many times as I have. That love for like a single movie just really like stuck with me. And when I went into college, like did not know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I'm like a pretty good communicator. I like a collaborative environment. So I ended up doing this film production major that Brad also did in school. And funnily enough, we didn't know each other then. We only met years after we both graduated. But I found that just being in that kind of collaborative environment, I really like scheduling and organization. And so I often found myself on that side of the production. I've only done work like that on amateur productions, but I always have a lot of fun doing it. So yeah, Brad and I have just been watching a lot of movies together, and we've been talking about doing this podcast for a while now. And I'm just really excited to get to share this with you guys. So I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, so we both sort of have, amateur experience making movies, but we, like you said, are always talking about movies. So it just seems like
Yeah.
this is a great opportunity to talk about them. But real quick, just like with the scope of this, I kind of just want to get at like, we will determine as sets of movies come up what we're going to watch. Right now, I would say we're kind of focused on remakes, things that take the same idea and do it over. But we're definitely going to talk about adaptations. I think we'll talk about legacy sequels and reboots. There will be places where it gets a little complicated because there's like TV remakes or, single offshoots. So it's like, I don't want to strictly talk about franchises necessarily, but there might be times where that feels like the right fit. So just to outline for the listener who wants to watch along, we'll sort of, when we start kind of a set of movies, let you know. So this one's easy. We started because this is maybe a strange movie to choose, but it was remade this year. So we are today talking about the original Roadhouse, released in 1989. It was remade this year in 2024, so that's what we'll be talking about next week. But since this is such a recent thing and something we can look at and say, oh, look, another remake, and also just kind of in the state of Hollywood, a straight-to-streaming, non-theatrical release remake, which is such a, another thing, kind of a good place to start. And this is such a sort of, cable classic and kind of has its own life and a fun place to start as well. So, Beth, were you familiar? Had you seen Roadhouse, or do you know it by reputation, or what's your relationship to Roadhouse?
My relationship to Roadhouse is that I had never seen it. I didn't know a lot about it other than Patrick Swayze was in it. And I think that this will be a common theme that you, the listener, should expect. I often go into movies very blind, very, very blindly, not having a lot of context, because not even that I necessarily actively avoid it, but if I'm going to go see it, I'm not going to do a lot of Googling before. Maybe I'll talk to friends about it, if they're talking about it before we go or something like that. But honestly, I like to go in with as close to no expectations as possible, if it is possible. So really, I think the only thing I knew about this movie is that Patrick Swayze was in it, and maybe some passing pop culture references, but nothing prepared me for what I saw.
Yeah, I also had never seen it. And like a lot of people my age, I bet, my only knowledge of it was that there's this episode of Family Guy. And I was not even a big Family Guy watcher, but even I knew this clip. And I think it's a pretty famous clip from, I looked up the info. It is season 8. It's an episode called Brian's Got a Brand New Bag. And Peter gets a DVD copy of Roadhouse for $1.
It's not called I Thought You'd Be Bigger.
But he gets Roadhouse, and after watching it, he decides that he can just diffuse any situation by roundhouse kicking things. And when he does that, he like looks at the camera and goes, Roadhouse. And that's literally my entire knowledge of Roadhouse was Peter Griffin saying Roadhouse. And
Weirdly, that reminds me of another friend of mine and like who would do a similar thing. I wonder if it's because of that episode of Family Guy or just because of Roadhouse.
But that episode was dedicated in Swayze's memory because that was around the time I think that he passed from pancreatic cancer. So I knew that like Swayze was a part of it, but I had never seen it. But I don't even know that I fully understood its reputation. I think I sort of later learned that people were like, "Oh, that movie's bad," but I don't think I knew that it's one of those kind of like pop culture objects that's like so bad it's good, or like kind of has this strange cult following. I didn't really understand the scope of that.
No, I had no idea about that either. And now that you say that, and now that I'm kind of thinking about it, maybe the thing that I knew about Roadhouse, other than Patrick Swayze being in it, was just that there was so much nudity in it. Because people will reference like seeing it late night on TV. Like getting the uncensored version on cable. Like when
Is there that much nudity in it?
I mean, there's like a fair amount of boobs.
I guess
in
that's
it.
right. Yeah.
Also,
I did make a comment about like how the '80s were really into boobs,
casual nudity. Yeah. Also, you get Swayze butt in it.
You do get Swayze butt in it. It was a weird phenomenon, like that might sound weird. I just feel like we sort of talked about this. Like the 80s, you could watch like a comedy like Stripes or Police Academy, and there would just be tons of nudity in it. And you sort of brought up the point. It's because they made movies for grown-ups then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Brad and I love podcasts. Like we listen to a lot of them and really enjoy like commentary about movies. Surprise, surprise. But one of the things
surprise, surprise, that meme will be dead by the time. Whatever. Anyway.
But just something that kind of comes up over and over again that we have talked a lot about independently as well, is just that the 80s and 90s were, and prior to that as well, but were just really like a heyday of like films for adults, that like it was just okay to be an adult who wanted to go see a movie that didn't have to cater to the four quadrants, like didn't have to cater.
Everything didn't have to be a marketing bonanza that everybody goes to see.
Yeah, and that like you're only successful as if you make X million dollars, So
that said, I don't think either of us super familiar with Roadhouse on its face. We can talk about the remake more when we get to it, but I did sort of just see they were remaking it, and even I, not knowing anything about it, was kind of like, they're remaking Roadhouse?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Like, of all the things. And that is, I think, the central question of this podcast is why do we remake the things we do? But let's talk a little bit about the history of Roadhouse itself. So this was directed by Rowdy Herrington. Rowdy Herrington, I've actually seen one of his other films. It is called Bobby Jones' Stroke of Genius. Being from Georgia, I think I have it on DVD, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yep. But that is the only other movie of his that I've known. Before Roadhouse, he had directed one other film called Jack's Back. He directed in 1992 a film called Gladiator. Not that Gladiator, obviously. Striking Distance, A Murder of Crows, The Stick-Up, Eyewitness, and then Bobby Jones' Stroke of Genius. So unquestionably Roadhouse, his biggest movie. I don't know a lot about him. We did watch I Thought You'd Be Bigger, the making of Roadhouse documentary on the special features of the Blu-ray that we rented. In that, it did seem like everybody was very effusive about him. Like people had good things to say. They were like, he's an actor's actor, made everybody feel very comfortable.
Actor's director, you mean?
Excuse me. Yes, an actor's director, and made everybody feel really comfortable. I think for a movie like this, that is very important because there are some strange things that happen in this movie. We can talk more about what some of the stuff said in that special feature documentary later, but anyway, they did a little. They had some interviews with him, but that's kind of all Rowdy Herrington is. I mean, Rowdy directed Roadhouse. Come on, I did steal that from I think Patrick Willems' Letterboxd review. But we got to talk about Swayze. What are your thoughts on Patrick Swayze? And this is a big time for him. Basically, he started as a dancer for the Disney theatrical group.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was Danny Zuko in a Broadway production of Grease.
Cool.
But we're
Sandy.
when he starts acting in when he starts acting in movies, this is like we're really getting into kind of Patrick Swayze movie star right here because Dirty Dancing is 2 years before Roadhouse. So it's like Dirty Dancing, Roadhouse. Next year, 1990 is going to be Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
Year after that, 1991 is going to be Point Break. So we're like Patrick
Peak
Swayze has
Swayze.
arrived. Yes,
Yeah.
that Swayze butt is going to be shaken all over. So, are you a Swayze fan? Is he? I'm gonna do the Mark Maron. Is he one of your guys? Is Swayze one of your guys?
So weirdly, Patrick Swayze is kind of an 80s blind spot for me. I do like love 80s movies and like watched a lot of the movies that were on cable and like various like network channels like all the time growing up, even kind of like I don't quote unquote obscure ones like Girls Just Want to Have Fun with Sarah Jessica Parker. And I think Helen Hunt is in that one too. And I love like Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles and like all the John Hughes filmography you could throw at me. I love it. But weirdly like Dirty Dancing was not super on my radar. And I honestly can't say that I've seen the entire thing, which like gasp. I know a lot of people who might be listening are like, how have you not? But
Even I have.
I know. I mean, I know like the famous scenes and nobody puts baby in a corner. And I know the important parts.
My brother mistakenly thought that quote was nobody puts baby in the freezer for some reason.
Oh no.
Yeah, it doesn't even make sense. But
it's
yeah,
very
he like
different.
said that unironically, like we were talking about that movie, and he was like, nobody puts baby in the freezer. And we are like, what?
No, very different than putting baby in the corner. So yeah, I mean, so my familiarity with Swayze, as with, my sort of attitude about going into movies in general is I don't know a lot about him. I like don't know even like the very high points of his filmography. And so I think that as we watch movies that are classics, kind of like, quote unquote classics, like I would call, I guess, Roadhouse a cult classic. I think that I am going to grow a lot in sort of my appreciation for certain actors because watching things like this is going to make me want to go and explore their filmographies more. So yeah, that is. I know that Patrick Swayze is really hot and he died of cancer, and I'm kind of. That's kind of where I'm at.
The bullet points. Yeah, no,
and that he's a dancer. Yes.
Yeah, I would say that. For me, Patrick Swayze was not a big figure, like for me either. Like even my mom or my sister weren't like, they probably did watch Dirty Dancing, but that was not one of the like heavy rotation movies. And I do think maybe my younger teenage brain with a smaller worldview was like, that's like a movie star for girls or something, like he's pretty for them. He's eye candy for
the ladies.
Yes.
Or just the male inclined.
Yes, the male inclined. But now I will say, like watching this, I was like, oh, he's like really good in this. Like,
yeah, he is.
He was nominated for a Razzie for this, which I think is really undeserved because he's not the problem with this movie at all.
Not at all. And I think in the special features documentary that we watched, somebody in it just said, you really have to play it straight. Like if you're going to do a movie like this, you have to play it like it is for real. And I think that that's why it's so successful, even though it's so silly.
Yeah, well, and I think that too is such a mentality. Like they say, we can't do it like winking. And I think every movie now is very winking. Mm-hmm. Like so many complaints about like, I don't want this to become a frequent punching bag because everybody has something to talk about it. But with Marvel movies, is that the sense of humor really shifted to sort of a, there's a line in Age of Ultron where Hawkeye says something like, he's a Norse god and I've got a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense. And it's like this kind of winking sort of, and like the earnestness of this is like really refreshing, especially nowadays. And that does sort of speak to the approach of this time period, mm-hmm. where that was like, well, no, that if you're going to do this, we're going to sell it. And I think too, like as a big fan of John Carpenter, I think of a movie like Big Trouble in Little China or something like that, where Kurt Russell just sells it because he understands what he's doing, and he's not, it's not winking. He's there's kind of a similarity there. They in that documentary sort of, They were like, we knew what we were doing. There's a little bit like some of the opening quotes. It feels like everybody's a little bit like, hey man, we knew this was a piece of crap. All right. And then they kind of go on to defend it as they keep going on. But at the very beginning, it's kind of funny because they're all like, hey, listen, we didn't think this was like Oscar material. All right. But yes, so Swayze, not a big figure for me, but I'm sort of excited because I've actually never even seen Point Break, which is a movie I think we will cover because it was remade.
Oh, great.
And directed by Catherine Bigelow. So I'm excited to watch that, and I'm excited now because it has Keanu in it too, who I love.
Also so hot.
That is a peak Keanu hotness era right there.
One of the many.
Yeah, so I'm excited to learn more about Swayze because I think too it was even like when he passed, I was in high school. And it was kind of like I didn't really know much about him. I knew he was the guy from Dirty Dancing, but it was like, yeah, and then it's a chick movie star, right? Whereas, obviously, different worldviews now. Anyway, who is very hot in this movie is Sam Elliott. Break me off a piece of Sam Elliott from this movie. I had never seen younger Sam Elliott. I mean, I know he's been around a long time. I just was looking up. He's actually, as of this record, 79 years old. And he's still in stuff. And he still looks kind of the same as he has for like 30 years. But this is right before, I would say, like Tombstone, where he like locks it in, like I am push broom, mustache, constant cowboy Sam Elliott. But this is where he's like just a little kind of dark, and long haired, and he just really steals the show, I think, as like the bouncer mentor, cooler mentor.
The cooler.
Wade Garrett.
Wade Garrett. And so the first scene that we see of him too, he is like working at a topless bar. Like,
oh yeah, I didn't even
remember that.
I was so focused on Sam. How could I see what was in the background? It was all about him on the phone in the foreground.
They cut. No. He's standing next to the table where like the topless ladies are like strutting around,
right.
And then that one guy has to get cooled down.
Right. Yes.
And then because he is the cooler, and he cools the guy down, goes answers the phone, talks to the Swayze. Where were we going with this?
I don't really. I just wanted to mention that Sam Elliott is in this.
And that he's super hot. I know you just want to talk about how hot Sam Elliott is.
Sam Elliott was really hot. But also in this, we have Kelly Lynch playing the main romantic pairing to Swayze. This part was actually originally going to be Annette Bening, but apparently was recast because they sort of she and Swayze had a lack of chemistry. I know you're a big Annette Bening fan.
I mean, I think the hard part about saying that you're a big fan of anybody is, people go name 5 films off the top.
Well, I think more so just like when we see she's in something, you're like, ooh, like.
Yes, yeah, I would definitely say that is sort of my reaction. I think the first thing I ever saw Annette Bening in was The Kids Are All Right, which I like watched with my mom as a teenager, and I know you recently watched on the plane, and I basically watched it over your shoulder because I was like, oh, wait till you see this part.
Yeah,
wait till
I have the worst luck with plane movies. I recently, or I guess this is a couple years ago, and it was just coming out, but I watched The Worst Person in the World, Swedish film, I believe. A lot of nudity in that movie. A lot of nudity in Kids Are All Right. I watched The Green Knight, which has a segment where Dev Patel ejaculates on a piece of cloth, and you see that. I pick these movies on airplanes, and then I'm stuck. So when they have the ones with the screens that are a little bit mirrored, so that the people next to you can't see, I feel better. But sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, the person sitting in the next row from me is just watching me watch Julianne Moore just climb Mark Ruffalo like a tree. I have the worst luck with that stuff. Years and years ago, I almost watched Watchmen on an airplane, but had the good sense whenever that was, to be like, actually, I think there's a bunch of blue penis in this movie, so I'm not going to watch that on this plane. Now, honestly, though, I've been inoculated, and I probably just would be like, grow up.
Grow up.
But anyway, yes, we recently watched The Kids Are All Right with Annette Bening.
So yes, I'm pretty sure the first movie I ever saw with Annette Bening, or at least the first movie I ever remember seeing with Annette Bening, was The Kids Are All Right. And yeah, Brad, I think you pretty accurately like described, like, when I see her in a cast, I perk up a little bit. I'm excited. It's like I think I react similarly to like Frances McDormand. Like I'm like, oh, cool. Like I like them. Like they're, just like they're both very seasoned, like incredible actresses, and I'm just like so happy to see them in movies. But yeah, I can definitely see like why Patrick Swayze and Annette Bening just might not like click in the same way. And I think that Kelly Lynch just does such a great job that, I mean, maybe, yes, like in hindsight, I could see other sort of stars of the time like being a fit, but she, I think, just plays it really, really well and definitely takes it seriously and plays it straight in such a like silly movie. But she is kind of like the, I don't know, serious anchor to the entire thing. I think without that, you really don't have the same movie.
Yeah. So just to round out the cast, the main antagonist is played by Ben Gazzara. He is Brad Wesley, who is this will tell you something about me, that my correlation for him was Boss Hogg from Dukes of Hazzard, because that's basically what he is. He's just a rich guy who owns the whole town and is after the protagonist. But this movie was produced by Joel Silver, who's a pretty big name. This is in a run of like this is a big time for Joel Silver because he has just done the year before Die Hard. Before that, the year before, he did Predator and Lethal Weapon. Coming up, he's got Lethal Weapon 2 and Die Hard 2. In a few years, he's going to have like Demolition Man and Richie Rich. He is later going to be integral in getting The Matrix made because he was just kind of that guy who would like find a sci-fi project he really liked and just really get in the camp. That's kind of how Predator came together. That's how The Matrix came together. But he's, I mean, one of the few producers that you can name to like people who aren't big into movies and be like Joel Silver and like, oh yeah, I've heard that name, you know? But that's kind of the production background for the whole thing. And this movie comes out May 19th, 1989. We walk into theaters and we are greeted by Roadhouse for the very first time. So I think with that, we can maybe talk about what happens in this movie. There is a lot to talk about. It's kind of baffling, but it starts off fairly simply, which is that James Dalton, played by Patrick Swayze, is a bouncer, or I guess a cooler. We maybe need to do a little bit of research into the terminology differences and what that means.
I think it just means that you know more martial arts.
Apparently so. But he is working, I believe, in like New York as this bouncer, and this guy comes to see him. He's been bouncing, he's been doing his bouncer stuff. He's been bouncing and cooling, and he sustained some sort of injury, and he's like bleeding, and so he's like back in some back room at this bar that he works at, and he's like
stitching his arm.
himself up. And this guy comes in and he's like, I'm from Jasper, Missouri, the worst place on planet Earth, apparently. This town, when we see it later, it is like nothing good happens here.
It's what I refer to as what the footloose town is afraid of.
No offense to the real Jasper, Missouri, but not well fictionalized in this film. But so this guy shows up to him. His name's Frank Tillman. He's a businessman, and he comes in and is like, hey, why don't you come and cool at my club? It's called the Double Deuce. Horrible name.
Bad name for
Such
a club.
a bad name. He's like, well, you shouldn't be talking to me. You should be talking to Sam Elliott. Go find Wade Garrett. He's the best there is at this sort of thing.
But he's old.
And he goes, yeah, but he's getting old. And he's like, but he's still the best. And he goes, no, he basically is like, I want a long-term investment. And he gives him these terms of like, okay, I'll do it. But it's like,
my way or the highway.
Yeah, it's my way or the highway. There's just, this movie's got machismo. And let me break that down. Macheese with like cheesy mo. Machismo is my term for this. But his deal is something like he's like $5,000 base
up front,
and then he's like $500 a day.
Plus medical expenses.
Plus my medical expenses while he is stitching himself up, which I got to say, good on James Dalton for getting health insurance in this market. I mean, really, really helpful in his line of work to make sure that he's got the medical expense. Really relevant to him at that moment.
Actively stitching up his arm from a stab wound. Also, the 80s were not playing with the knife fights. There
No,
were
apparently
so
not.
many knife fights.
But so yeah, he agrees to do this. He goes out to Jasper, and he ends up living in a farmhouse, like in a barn owned by this guy named Emmett, who's the best guy in the whole movie, in my opinion.
Emmett kills it.
Very enjoyable. Just kind of a country bumpkin sort of fella. Owns this farm, and there's a line where the guy, he calls him sir, and he says like, calling me sir is like putting an elevator in
an outhouse that just don't fit.
Yes, yeah. So there's, to give you an idea of the folksy things being espoused by Emmett. So yeah, he finds a place to live. The rent is $100 a month. He's like, is that all right? Can you afford that?
Makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Anyway, but moving on. We can't dwell on this too much.
So he gets to the club, and there's a musician there played by Jeff Healey, a real blues musician, who plays his guitar on his lap, kind of like a lap steel, but he is blind. And I'm like a pretty good like blues guitarist, especially considering that he's not like playing the guitar like a guitar. Dalton knows him from before. He like somewhere along the way they're
on the circuit.
Yeah, they've worked a club, and the band plays on it. This place is just such a shithole that they have chicken wire wrapped around the stage so that when the band plays, like they won't get hit with beer bottles and stuff like that.
Sure. Also, I must say, the way that beer bottles comically shatter against
the breakaway glass really working against the chicken wire.
It really is, because I'm like, bottles would not break like that when you just throw them at chicken wire. Yeah, like there's those little touches just really crack me up throughout this movie.
Yeah, so somewhere in there, Dalton kind of is like getting the lay of the land. He's not quite working yet, but he's like meeting the people who are there. Mm-hmm. I forget exactly at what point he says this. It might be before he goes to Jasper, but he says, someone asked him if he'll fly out there, and he goes, "Oh, I don't fly. It's too dangerous."
I have that written down.
Yeah, that was one of the quotes I wrote down. Anyway, he gets to the club, and he's just kind of getting the lay of the land. He sees the guy from the band that he knows.
Mm-hmm. He does not tell anyone his name until he absolutely has to, because apparently his reputation in this, roadhouse circuit is such that every single person knows that he is the cooler.
Yes, and he's just sort of meeting the regulars and like watching and like people are fighting, but he's not really getting involved yet. And there's one line in there too that I remember where this guy like almost picks a fight with him, or I think he's one of the bouncers initially, and he's really hot-headed. And he points at Dalton and he goes like, "If you're not drinking, you're out of here," or something like that, because he's not buying a drink right away. And this girl sitting at the bar like tries to kind of, it's a very hokey like, "How you doing, kid? Welcome to town." And she does like, "Don't mind him. He was born an asshole and just grew bigger," is what she says about him. But yeah, so it's through that he sort of gets to know the Double Deuce. He rents his place. Then before he starts working in earnest, he like has a big meeting with all the bouncers that are working at the club, where he's basically going to be like, "Hey, here's how my system works." And he gives them, a la Fight Club, some rules.
3 rules.
3 rules. First one, never underestimate your opponent. Expect the unexpected. That's 2 rules, Dalton. Rule 1A, expect the unexpected.
1B.
2 is take it outside. Never start a fight in the bar unless it's absolutely necessary.
Do they ever follow this rule?
Not once.
No.
I don't think ever. I don't think that ever happens in this movie. And number 3 is most important. It's
be nice.
Be nice. And there's some pretty good lines in there where he's like, if someone's cursing you out, I want you to be nice. If someone picks a fight with you, you throw them out, but you be nice. And he goes like,
and if somebody has to help you, you're both nice. You both take them by the arm, and you are both nice.
Someone says like, what if someone calls my mama a whore? And he goes, well, is she? But he's basically like, don't let them rattle you. Just be nice. A thing that feels like it's going to be thematically important, but I would say does not really come up ever. There's no like, well, what sets him apart is he's nice. That like you think that's going to be sort of the takeaway, but that is not part of it at all, really. But anyway, he gives these guys the rules. He works kind of his first night at the Double Deuce, and I think this. It's hard to remember because it is it's paced a little strangely. It'll like have something away from the double deuce and then come back to it. And so in your memory, it can sort of get a little mushed together.
It's like how night after night in a club just kind of all runs together.
Is this a secret like psychological masterpiece? But there's like a groping scene that goes on for far too long. But that leads to him getting in a fight and basically getting stabbed in the arm.
Stabbed in the chest near his heart.
Oh, okay, yes. And then he goes to the hospital, and we meet Kelly Lynch's character, who is Dr. Elizabeth Clay. And they have a fun little kind of tete-a-tete talking about some different things about like his lifestyle. She has like his medical chart, and she like reads out all the ways he's been injured. And,
well, so he carries it with him. She alludes to that, and he goes, "It saves time."
Yes. She asks him some funny questions.
My favorite one is, "Do you ever win a fight?" And he goes, "No one ever wins.
No one ever wins a fight." That's not what he sounds like.
I'm Batman.
She says to him, "I thought you'd be bigger," which is a refrain throughout the movie that like in this line of work, I thought you'd be bigger.
I think that there are just a lot of really nice details like this that make this so much more than like a B movie. Those things that like carry through, that even though we were just talking about how there are certain things that are set up that don't necessarily sort of pay off through the course of the film, there are details like him carrying that and like having these little quippy one-liners that really just elevate it and like make it fun and memorable. And I would watch this again. Like, I think it's so much fun.
Yeah, I almost feel like as we're doing this and I'm realizing how much I don't remember, because there is such a it is like it's a full 2 hours pretty much. It's like an hour 54 or something. And so there's a lot that is packed into this movie, and also it is so, as I'm going to get to in a second, it feels so disconnected from itself in a way that it's sort of baffling that it's all happening in one movie.
Well, another thing we learned in the documentary on the DVD extras is that the original rough cut of this film was 3.5 hours.
Yes, that is nuts. So whenever the petition starts, release what is his name?
Release the director's cut.
Release the rowdy cut.
Rowdy cut.
When are we getting the 3.5 hour rowdy cut?
The Rowdy Roadhouse cut.
Well, I will say, when the credits were rolling, it listed Keith David, and I think Keith David's one of our great actors. Like, we could never begin to list all of his voice credits, but then like he's in The Thing, one of my favorite movies, and They Live. But he barely appears. Like, he's in the background of one scene, and and I was like, what's going on with that? And apparently a huge part of what got cut was they had to cut secondary characters. And there was this whole subplot where, like, I guess some of Brad Wesley's people are like racist to Keith David. So Dalton throws him out and beats him up or something. But they basically were like, this doesn't impact the larger story. So this is the stuff that goes. So this Keith David ends up kind of barely in it. But what I think is weird about that is that stuff would add to a thematic thing of be nice, right? If he broke up someone being racist, that would actually serve the like, oh yeah, because he's nice. Whereas like that feels totally forgotten. But this is a movie that I think is not concerned with like, what's my thematic thesis statement, you know? But it's just a little bit funny to me that
you don't think that was at the top of the list?
The other thing that was said in that documentary was that part of what they did to sort of patch over the transition of removing all that content is they used the music to be the transition. So every time you go into the double deuce, some new blues song starts playing, and it's Healy playing his guitar, and it's like the band playing, which is an okay device. I will say that happens so many times, and the songs are all so similar, unless it's the handful that I know, like Roadhouse, a cover of Roadhouse by the Doors, or there's a Long Tall Sally cover in there. There's like a couple blues standards that
I think Mustang Sally.
Yeah, Mustang Sally's in there. There's some things that I know just as a music fan, but in general, it kind of blends together after a while, and you're like, oh, here we are. And so that makes it a little hard in memory to sort of distinguish events from one another.
So yeah, like throughout the course of the film, like the stuff that happens during the day, you meet different people in town, and you find out kind of, you know, how they're related to each other and people's histories and things. And so one of the people you meet is the hardware store owner, Red. And eventually you find out that he's Doc's uncle who raised her. It's a very sweet, sad story. that leads to one of the climactic moments in the end where there are just explosions for no apparent
well, so that's why
reason.
like it's hard to even say where that like some of the things that happen is like
it takes a turn at some point.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of some of the things that, like, there's just typical, fights at the Double Deuce. Like the first night, he fires the bartender because he finds out he's been skimming. But this bartender is like the favorite nephew of Brad Wesley, so he's pressured to like give him his job back. But he's like, I won't do it because I'm principled. And that so that causes this tension where Brad Wesley's out to get him, and so there's like these altercations happening at the Double Deuce. During the day, he is shirtless doing Tai Chi. That
I
is
love it.
on the bonus features DVD. That's like the menu is him shirtless doing Tai Chi in white pants.
I also, speaking of that, I love when we first see him doing Tai Chi. Emmett, the farmer, finds out that Patrick Swayze is like has secret money during that first scene. I think Emmett goes and he like looks at the car under the cover in the barn and like sees that it's a Mercedes, and he's just kind of like looking around like, who is this man who I'm letting rent the room in my barn? Like that kind of like looking around. I just find it so funny that, he's, out in the middle of the country in Missouri, just next to a lake, very picturesque, doing Tai Chi, and this farmer's like, what? And then you also then see Brad Wesley's estate is like across this lake or across this pond, whatever kind of water feature it is. But you see him ride up on a 4-wheeler and like watch Patrick Swayze do Tai Chi for a minute in like the most obvious way I've ever seen somebody quote unquote spy on someone else. And then he just kind of like, you get close-ups, which I think the close-ups in this movie are another like great thing to highlight. I miss this. I wish there was more of this in films. But
there are a lot of slow zooms as well, like slow zoom into someone's face. Not the 70s quick zoom, like just kind of a gentle push in.
But yeah, so like the close up on Brad Wesley's face, and he kind of like sneers and like tilts his head up and like, huh, and then like drives away on his 4-wheeler. It's just very, very amusing to me.
One thing on that note, actually, one thing we can't criticize this movie for is well shot, and we learned shot by Dean Cundy. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa, you got to be kidding me, because Dean Cundy is legendary cinematographer. He did The Thing, something that let's keep a streak and see how many episodes I can bring up The Thing.
It's gonna be like every single
it's gonna
one.
be easy. But he worked with John Carpenter a lot in the early days, so he did a lot of his early movies like The Fog and Halloween that all have just such a distinctive, awesome look. The Fog looks so good. He did this little film called Jurassic Park. You can read his credits. Back to the Future. He's worked with he's really tapered off as he's gotten older, but for a while there, just like he was the guy. Like he just, his stuff all looks so good. And so and this movie does too. Like that's part of what, to the point of kind of like, we're not going to half-ass any part of this, even if it's a little corny. Like it's shot like it is a good movie.
Yeah, the movie looks great. Like I don't think that you can really argue with that. Like throughout the
Him
lighting,
doing shirtless Tai Chi is like lit and
it's beautiful. I mean, not just because Patrick Swayze's in it. It's just like it looks nice. I feel like I'm there doing Tai Chi with him.
I want to follow his routine. Back to these events. Tensions are rising. Dalton is interested in Elizabeth. They kind of have some dates. She picks him up from the Double Deuce one night. She says something to him like, you have a real interesting lifestyle. And he goes, too ugly for you. And I said something, he's talking about his lifestyle, but I sort of thought it was funny that out of context, it sounds like one of the prettiest men who ever lived turning to this woman going like, too ugly for you. So that's kicking off. But then come to find out, it's not super clear. And apparently it was not even clear to Kelly Lynch or anyone on set. They were trying to keep it purposefully ambiguous, but she and Brad Wesley, the villain, have a sort of pre-existing relationship, and he's like interested in her.
They have a past.
Yeah, something is going on there.
And I think I think in the movie they say that she like moved away, like ran, like quote unquote, maybe ran away from him.
Yeah.
And he's just never gotten over that. So it is left ambiguous whether they were just married or if they were together or like, just, or if he just coveted her, is kind of, sort of left up to the viewer's imagination, which is another thing that I wish like modern movies would do more, is just kind of like leave clues for the viewer to sort of like come up with their own little like version of this, of parts of the story.
Yeah,
Like I don't think that you have to like lay everything out for people.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about that. I think it can be cool to leave things open to interpretation. The only thing I would maybe say is like trusting the actor with that information, like so that they know, because I think it will help them. Apparently, like with Anatomy of a Fall from
I was
this year.
just going to bring this
Yes,
up.
they didn't tell Sandra Hüller whether she did it, right? Like if you've not seen Anatomy of a Fall, the central conflict is this thing that happened. I mean,
It's a murder mystery.
It's a murder mystery, but the central question is whether this character did it, and apparently the actress herself does not know. And I've seen sort of a mixed. I think it was on Unspooled, right? That like which you're a bigger listener of than I.
I would say like I'm a more maybe frequent listener of Unspooled, and I'll check out episodes if I want to learn a little bit more about a movie that I'm maybe interested in seeing but on the fence about, or if there's something that I've just seen and I'm just trying to like consume all of the content I can find about that movie.
Yeah, and I just think you were telling me that Amy from Unspooled said that she sort of thinks that Justine Triet should have trusted Sandra Hüller with that information, essentially. Like, your actor is talented enough, she can know that and still sell the uncertainty of it. And I see that argument, but I also think that there's maybe an interesting experiment in like if the actor doesn't know, because it leaves everybody like, what are her allegiances, right? And I think so. I'm kind of, but that is sort of the same. It's so funny that we're
the same device.
Back to Roadhouse, a similar film,
a similar film
in all ways. It's interesting. They say that like they didn't give Kelly Lynch that information. It sounds like the information doesn't exist. Like they did not make that decision. And I'm a little more in the camp of like either let your actor figure that out and make that choice, or make it not matter. But it seems like it kind of matters, and so somebody should know. But it's not. It ends up not being that big a deal. All you kind of need to know is they have some sort of thing going on.
I think that there are so many things already just like going on in this movie that it doesn't distract me that I don't know. I guess the thing about it that I would want to know is just like sort of how intensely, or how intense the relationship between Brad Wesley and the doctor character like was in the past, because he really is just upset that Dalton is with her. I mean, on top of many other things, that Dalton is just kind of like standing up to this entitled prick who's, who literally openly admits that he's just going to own the whole town. Like a 1920s sort of boss tweed villain. And I don't know. I think that maybe that would do a little bit more, but I do think that the ambiguity of it doesn't like bother me or like distract me from the fact that just this whole movie is bonkers.
Yeah. So as this tension is sort of ratcheting up and we learn these things about Elizabeth and about Brad Wesley, it's like a number of different things happen. There's like a store owned by friends of the Double Deuce, kind of adjacent to the Double Deuce, that like blows up one night or catches on fire. And it's pretty obvious Brad Wesley had something to do with that. There's another thing where like a giant jacked up like
this is
four-wheel
so
pickup
silly
truck like runs over a car.
So
I forget I was so just like out of it by that, but not out of the mood, but like not following that. I was like, what is the significance of the like?
So they do set up that one of Brad Wesley's henchmen drives this like ridiculous monster truck.
Yes.
Like it shows up at the Double Deuce one night. And honestly, I was kind of thinking that maybe they would just like run the like giant monster truck through the Double Deuce. Like I'm kind of surprised they didn't do that. But I mean, obviously the movie would be a little bit different if they did. I know for sure that it like runs through the car dealership because the man who owns the car dealership is sort of like on the side of, all of the other business owners in town, Red, Elizabeth's uncle who owns the hardware store, Frank, the owner of the Double Deuce, they're all kind of on the side of, yeah, Brad Wesley is like extorting all of us, he's like the mob. He's collecting for the quote unquote like Jasper Improvement Society. And he's just, getting rich off like the work of these men who, he's not necessarily like doing anything to, benefit back.
Yeah, he's basically like a proto gentrifier. He is like he brags at one point. He's like, JC Penney's coming here now. Like he's sort of not helping the small businesses of town, but just sort of blindly helping the economy. A funny commentary to be making in 1989. I don't know that that's intentional, but there's sort of a little bit kind of like he is just about business for business's sake and is not interested in like things like, I mean, like when Tillman comes to Dalton, he's like, I want to clean this place up and make the Double Deuce a place that people want to come to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a local establishment, whereas Brad Wesley's allegiances are not to the town necessarily. They're to making money for himself at the town's expense.
Right, because he owns so much of the town.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's very funny. And I think like it definitely plays into sort of the 80s, like greed is good. And we're kind of like, it's the sort of reversal of that idea and sort of coming out.
And it's the boss hog thing, right?
Yeah.
Things get so tense that it's time to call in backup. And so Dalton puts in a call to his buddy Wade Garrett, who was alluded to in the opening scenes, played by Sam Elliott.
Hot Sam Elliott.
And so he shows up and he's just the coolest guy that ever lived.
I love his little hairband that he uses at some points because it like doesn't really keep his hair back, but it's very cute that he's like, I'm gonna tie up my little I'm gonna do my little half up hairdo.
Yes, yeah. So he's sort of there to like help him out, but he's like, you're in way over your head, man. Like this situation's really, you should just get out of here, essentially. But he meets Elizabeth and is like, she's great. He says some objectifying things about her, but is like, you've lucked out with this relationship, but in general, you're in a real rough spot.
Well, and I think Sam Elliott like discourages him from being in a relationship and being in love with her,
right?
Because I mean, Wade Garrett's philosophy is to like be pretty detached and also sort of just like treat the job as the job. We sort of get little snippets of this time in the past when Patrick Swayze was in a different town and he got involved with a woman who's, I think he got involved with a woman who was married, and her husband like stuck a gun in her face and then he ended up killing that man.
Yeah. So they make reference to the fact that Dalton was let off for being self-defense essentially, but was charged with like murder or manslaughter. There's also a strange reference in the bar scene. They're like, when they figure out who it is, one guy in one of the bar scenes, somebody says like, I hear he ripped a guy's throat out, or, which foreshadowing.
That shit's crazy. When you see it, you're just like, oh, that's how. Okay. All right. That's how you're going to do.
So, we have some fun times with Wade Garrett. They dance together in this diner. They have some good times, and so he's kind of like commiserating, like, you shouldn't be doing this, but I get why, more or less. Then one night, Elizabeth comes to Dalton's house, like at Emmett's farm, and is trying to convince him to like let this all go and like let Brad Wesley essentially get away with whatever he's doing, and he's is obstinate about that. Then there's a huge explosion. Emmett's house is blown up. They run outside. Shirtless Patrick Swayze, still in the white pants, I think, goes and gets Emmett, who is wearing full-on like red prospector, full body pajamas. We don't see the butt flap, but
we can all imagine
I'm positive there is one. But anyway, so pull him out. What in tarnation? That's not what he does, but he might as well. And so he rescues Emmett from the fire and goes outside, and who should be there but one of Wesley's henchman, Jimmy Reno, and I think he tries to get away on like an ATV or a motorcycle.
Yeah, one of those.
One
And
of those kind of things.
when this started happening and Patrick Swayze just starts like booking it, I was like, oh my God, he's going to tackle him off the motorcycle.
So
and then he does.
He kind of like, the motorcycle's coming around on this like dirt path, and there's like this embankment, and Patrick Swayze's up higher and like runs at him and just like tackles him off the motorcycle like something out of a Mad Max movie. And which at this point you're like, what am I? Remember when this movie was about a bouncer like telling people to be nice? What is going? This is a different movie now. And so they proceed to have this huge fist fight. There's like a knife involved.
There's always a knife involved.
I will say this is where it's like you can really see like Swayze's dancing background, because you're like, he is a movement so you can sort of see the choreography in the fight. It's pretty interesting.
I would say, I mean, all of the fights are honestly very like beautiful to watch. Like they're a little bit more like chaotic in the bars and stuff, but the choreography and like the stunts in this movie are really excellent.
Yeah. And so they have this fight. It escalates. There's a knife at one point. It almost looks like he gets his foot caught in a tree, and it almost looks like Reno has the upper hand. But then what ends up happening is Reno pulls a gun on him, shoots and misses, and Dalton gets a hold of him and rips his throat out. And Elizabeth is like, oh my God, you ripped his throat out, and like doesn't speak to him because it's a shocking thing for him to do.
And not only does he do that, after Elizabeth sees him, runs away. I think honestly, part of it is she ran away in terror. Part of it is she was like, okay, you're fine. I gotta go. She does check the pulse of the guy whose throat is ripped out. Obviously he dead, but like she runs away to just go make sure, I think, that like Emmett is still okay and maybe to go get help. But then Patrick Swayze, like an insane person, grabs this dead body. And you remember how I told you that Brad Wesley's house is on the other side of this lake pond water feature? Yeah, he yells for Brad Wesley and just
like,
says, I have your man, and like pushes him across.
The body floating in the water, walks like waist deep into the water, screaming, and then pushes the body towards his house. I think this is this would take reshoots in nowadays, but this is where this movie should hit the climax here. He should go confront Wesley at this moment.
Yes.
Instead, the night passes like normal.
I want to know if, like, I can't wait to watch the next one.
Yeah, to see
if they do that in the remake. Like,
yes.
Y'all, the reason we're spending so much time talking about this is because it's just crazy. And I you maybe if you're listening to this, you've already watched this movie. But it's just so insane to think that this scene, I would have never guessed that this scene would have been in the movie after watching the first 15 minutes of this movie.
Yes. And it's like,
but yes,
the other thing too is the prospect, we'll get into this when we get to it, but the prospect of remaking this movie is so like, this is from another time. We don't really make movies like this that are like earnestly corny and have this much happening. And there's just a filmmaking style that's from that time, and movies don't look like that anymore. So I'm like, how do you even approach trying to take this material and do something either the same thing with it? Also, Jake Gyllenhaal is the choice for that, but that's
for next week.
But anyway, it's very nuts. The night passes, and the next day, Dalton gets a call from Wesley, and he's like, either Elizabeth or Wade Garrett are gonna die. And I don't know, that doesn't make any sense, because I thought Wesley liked Elizabeth, but apparently not enough that he won't kill her. But basically,
she
he's
did
like,
run away from him.
Yes. And so he goes to try to warn the two of them. He finds Elizabeth, warns her. He comes to check on Wade Garrett, who looks like he's just taking a nap on the bar, but he's been stabbed.
He did.
R.I.P. Hot Sam Elliott. So
pour one out for the homie.
So the Wade Garrett is killed, and this basically sends the be nice thing is out the window. Swayze's out for blood. Like from here, basically he like rigs up his car.
Yeah, this is sick.
With a knife to hold the accelerator down, and aims it at Wesley's compound. And it like a bunch of guys are out front with guns shooting at it. This is the movie about the bouncer in the nightclub. Remember that? Sorry. Remember when it was that? there's guns being shot at an unmanned vehicle, and it comes over these hedges, and then they like it lands and crashes. It like does a roll, and they're all like, "Oh, that sneaky bastard" or whatever, because he like used a knife to hold down the accelerator.
In some ways, when the guys were just shooting at it, I was like, I don't. It reminded me of Narcos. Of like just somebody trying to like send a car at like Pablo Escobar's compound or something, and they were just like, yes.
Yeah. I've not seen Narcos, but like Breaking Bad or something. Like it definitely had that kind of like.
I don't remember. I don't think that actually happened in Narcos, but it just
yes,
the shooting at it
that
definitely
style of like conflict. Yes,
it's just so escalated that it's so silly. But yeah, so important though that the knife was the thing holding the accelerator down, because I think it's the nephew, who was the former bartender, ends up holstering the knife. And I think also that knife was used to slash Patrick Swayze's tires earlier in the movie.
Yes,
I believe
the knife has been that's how he gets a hold of it. And that is one of the better comedic bits. Is all throughout the movie, different damage is happening to his car, and he has to like go to the auto shop constantly to like they put like a stop sign through his windshield.
That
is
so funny.
Like he leaves his date and it like, let me get the stop sign out of my windshield. Like and pulls it out unsanctimoniously.
But not only does he like. They don't like highlight him pulling it out like they do.
No, yeah, it's just very casual.
Right, yes. And it's like, it's not even like the main thing in the frame. Like Elizabeth's car is like parked in front of him, and like through the windows you see him pulling the stop sign out of his out of the smashed car window.
Yes. Anyway, that's how many things are happening. That like the stuff in the bar happens, but then the aftermath of that is his car is always getting messed with. So anyway,
that's why he buys a beater at the beginning.
Right. So he gets his car. He drives it at the compound. He manages to sneak in. He's being kind of pursued by a bunch of the henchmen. He dispatches them in some like non-lethal ways, I think, like fist fights and stuff, because he never at any point has a gun.
He never has a gun. I do think he does kill several of them in the final
it's
scenes.
Unclear. There is the reason I'm not remembering is because there's one that just stands out, and that is they go to this like trophy room full of like hunting trophies, like taxidermied animals, and a polar bear is pushed over on this guy.
He always hated that room.
And it seems like it was trying to be sold as like the polar bear falling on him was enough to kill him at first. But yeah, so that happens. He confronts Wesley in this trophy room, and basically like disarms him, I think, but doesn't kill him. But then the townspeople all arrive and like, no need to worry, we'll kill him. And so they all like shoot, like multiple townspeople shoot Wesley. The police arrive and they're like, I don't know what happened here. And this guy crawls out from under the polar bear. Is like, a polar bear fell on me. And anyway, so yeah, then all is well. Wesley is dead, and then they reconcile, and Elizabeth and Dalton swim in a lake
down at their favorite swimming hole.
And the Double Deuce is doing better, I guess, and America rejoices.
Because this movie, as we were watching it, I just turned to Brad and I go, this movie is so fucking 80s and so fucking American. Like, it is just, like, halfway through, you just really, I think it hits you, like, how American this movie is. It is crazy. Before we, now that we've, gotten to the end of the plot and everything, Brad, I do have a very important question for you. How do you feel about the fact that the first movie that we're covering has a villain named Brad?
He's not doing much for Brads. It's a tough name to have. There's lots of bad Brads out there, I will say. I hope I'm not one of them, but I don't like that he's he's a bad Brad. That's all I got to say, really. It's just not. I don't claim him.
I don't claim
Brad Wesley, bad Brad. All right,
official.
You heard it here. So this movie had a budget of $15 million, is what I'm seeing. It says its domestic gross was $30 million, so double-digit budget, pretty respectable. That's just box office, I guess. Its opening weekend was $6 million. I don't really. That might be adjusted. I don't know if that's adjusted. Box Office Mojo has it as 30 million, so maybe it's like
Well, that's domestic
DVD
box office, right?
Yeah, so maybe that's worldwide, and there might be some like video included in that
Mm-hmm.
because basically the legacy of this movie is it had a long tail on cable. It was a big deal as it sort of aged. This is like played on cable all the time, and people would just watch it. It was kind of one of those movies that would just be on. And at the time, unappreciated, mostly, kind of thought of as bad or so bad it's good kind of thing. It was nominated for 5 Razzies. Worst Picture, Worst Actor for Patrick Swayze, Worst Supporting Actor for Ben Gazzara as Brad Wesley, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. I would say maybe only one of those is deserved.
I would say up to 3.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, granted, we can take a look at the year, like what the other nominees were, but like just let's say Worst Picture, for instance. But in general, like Patrick Swayze, not the problem with this movie.
No.
Ben Gazzara, not the problem with this movie, I don't think. He's maybe a little hammy, but that's also, he's committing to what they're telling him to do.
That's true.
Do I think this is the worst picture of that year? Probably not. I mean, maybe it could be nominated. I don't really know what the whole field of 1989 was like.
What are the other Razzie Worst Picture nominees for 89?
For 89, the other nominees are Speed Zone, not familiar, Lock Up, not familiar, Roadhouse, The Karate Kid Part 3,
Yikes.
and Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which I've not seen, but I do know by reputation is like by the time the Star Trek movies get that far along, they are not well liked. I'm aware. And I think back in those days too, I think nowadays the Razzies tend to be a little more spread out, but back in the day, the Razzies often had sweeps. Like if something won anything for the Razzies, it usually won all of them.
Oh, yikes.
And so I think Star Trek probably took all of those. But no, I'd say the only one is screenplay, because it's very corny and it goes off the rails. I think it's like a screenwriting thing I've heard before is like, stick to your premise, right? My premise is my story is about a guy who's a bouncer who is nice. And so everything should like be delivering on that.
Yeah, flow from that.
By the end, we're so far afield from what the movie began as in a way that does not feel organic, in a way that's like, there's explosions and monster trucks and like what is happening now?
I would love to know what the original version of this screenplay is like and how different the final version ended up being, but also the fact that the rough cut was 3.5 hours. Like, other than sort of the Keith David of it all that we discussed earlier, what else did they cut out? Like what?
Yeah, because Rowdy alluded to
Yes.
like the script being so. He was like, part of the reason that happened is the script was so long. We shot way more or something. So it was apparently a long script.
And it's crazy that with the budget they had that they shot that much.
But with the screenplay, though, what I will say is whether or not it deserves a Razzie, it has some iconic lines in it. So let's recap a couple things from this movie. Of course, you have the 3 rules with be nice. And then he says later on in that same monologue, I want you to be nice until it's time to not be nice, which is profound.
And how do we know when it's time to not be nice? I will tell you when it's time to not be nice anymore.
You have Wade Garrett saying that gal's got entirely too much brains to have an ass like that. You've got maybe one of the most iconic lines is it was during that fist fight with Jimmy Reno. He says to him, I used to fuck guys like you in prison.
Yeah, that was wild. When he says that,
unhinged line.
Really is.
Really strange.
You're too stupid to have a good time.
Yes, these guys come in and they're like, you're not well. He tells, Dalton tells him, you're not welcome here. He goes, well, what are these people doing? Because there's a bunch of people in the Double Deuce already. And he goes, they're drinking and having a good time. And he goes, well, that's what we're here to do. And then he like has a razor blade in his boot and he like tries to kick Dalton. And Dalton grabs his leg and he goes, you're too stupid to have a good time.
So funny. Let's see if I have any others.
There's a point too where they're like in the back office and a fight begins and the guy pulls a knife on Dalton and goes something like, what are you scared of, chicken dick? Or something.
Me?
Yeah. My Way or the Highway, of course. And then over and over again, I thought you'd be bigger.
Mm-hmm, yeah, the through line. It's funny too that the variety of characters who say that to him in the movie, like whether they are sort of directly involved in, his line of work or not, regardless of whether they sort of know him by reputation or just meet him along the way, the fact that like this is the constant refrain to me is just very funny.
I think also the last line of the movie might be a polar bear fell on me.
It might be.
I think yeah. Anyway, endlessly quotable movie. What a time. So on my Letterboxd, I gave this 3 stars because it is, to me, 3 stars is just the purest, like, this movie is good, is just as enough good that I can call it good. It's 2.5 is like, it's pretty good, but enough that it's bad. That's how I kind of think about it. And so it's like, I think it's it's very watchable. It is definitely like, you're not going to be bored watching Roadhouse.
It makes total sense that this had such a long life in cable because it is the kind of thing that, especially if you've already seen it, I could totally picture this movie just being on in the background and you kind of like are glancing at it like every so often, like, doing dishes or whatever. Like it's kind of one of those things that it's just so wild to watch that you can glance at it and really just laugh a little bit or get into one of the fight scenes. Like it's very watchable.
Yeah, I read a thing that in like 2020 some poll was done. It was voted the most watched film on cable, or that were the most people said they had watched it on cable.
Wow.
So yeah, it definitely such a Spike TV movie.
Yes.
That's my opinion. What is your overall opinion? Do you want to give a star rating, or is that not your jam?
I don't often give a star rating just because I think that I this kind of goes back to iTunes days where, I would star rate a lot of the songs in my music library. And sort of just as my tastes and opinions changed over time, I would like see what I gave something and feel some shame about it sometimes. And so it's not that I am necessarily afraid to do that as an adult, but I don't. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I forget like how I was feeling in the moment about something, and I don't necessarily want to be like beholden to a rating in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I just felt like sharing mine, but
Oh no, of course. Like I don't see anything wrong with doing that. I think that I just prefer to share my thoughts on something rather than sort of give it a number.
Yeah, it makes sense. But with that said, the fun part of rating something on Letterboxd is reading other people's reviews.
Yes.
So if you want to call out some highlights here, I will just at least begin with something I brought up at the very beginning, which is this review from a 4-star review from user K blank in asterisk Peter Griffin voice Roadhouse.
Okay, actually I found just a single one-liner that I find very funny, but I think that this person means earnestly. This is the Great Gatsby of the 1980s, which on its face, and this is a 4.5-star review of this movie, but something that I did write down that I think relates to this review is that Patrick Swayze really sees the danger of entitled people. I think maybe sort of we get the vibe that he is just very wary of people with money and power. And
yeah, he says something like, I've known people like Brad Wesley all my life, and they take and take until somebody takes them. Yeah.
So yeah, I think and I do think it's funny though, because, Patrick Swayze does demand a pretty penny for his services. So like somebody has to be pretty well off to hire him in the first place. But I mean, Frank Tillman doesn't have money like Brad Wesley.
Yeah. To move to a more professional review from Roger Ebert, you may have heard of. This is such good Roger Ebert writing. This is the opening 2 paragraphs of his review that I just want to go over real quick. The guiding spirit of Roadhouse can be glimpsed in one particular scene, which is set in a trophy room of an evil sadist who holds a helpless town in his iron grasp. His hunting trophies include not only the usual deer and elk and antelopes, but also orangutans, llamas, and a matched set of tropical monkeys. This guy went hunting in the zoo. We are expected to believe that this sadist financed these hunting expeditions by shaking down the businessmen in a town that, on the visible evidence, contains a bar, a general store, a Ford dealership, and 2 residences. Roadhouse is the kind of movie that leaves reality so far behind, you have to accept it on its own terms. And I think that does capture it.
Yeah.
So the overall there is letterboxed average of 3.4, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 44%. Just to give you an idea, a fun watch. I would say watch Roadhouse if you hadn't seen it. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it is worth the journey.
Yeah, get some friends together, like have a couple drinks and like giggle about it, I think.
Mhm.
It's a good time. But on September 9th, 2015, I read on Wikipedia here, it says it was announced that Ronda Rousey was going to be in a remake of Roadhouse. But that basically fell apart and was canceled in 2016. I think that's an interesting take on Roadhouse, at least to do something different where, you kind of be like, it's this, tough lady bouncer.
Like a gender flip. I think, and
yeah.
especially with somebody who's as like badass as she is, like I think that would have been very cool to do.
Yeah, I think that was just kind of that moment where she was really simmering at the top of pop culture for whatever reason. And so that was kind of like an interesting idea. But of course...
Imagine, though, with a dancer's background, imagine if Julianne Hough were in a reincarnation
Yeah, that's
of
actually a
Roadhouse.
better point, though. It should be like someone with a dance background to really replicate the...
It would be so funny.
But of course, in this year, 2024, we had a remake starring Jake Gyllenhaal, which we will be covering next week right here on Copy Cuts. So it's on Amazon Prime. It's a Prime original. Go give it a watch, and we'll reconvene then to talk about it. Thanks for listening. Copy Cuts is a co-production of 5 Times Media and Signal Conquers Noise. It's hosted and produced by Beth Marcinko and me, Brad Gerke. I usually edit the show as well, but sometimes so does Beth. Thanks to Emily Backus and Mom Friend for our theme song. Our outro song is Pale Imitation by Tyler Key. Follow us on Instagram and Letterboxd at CopyCutsPod, or find us at copycutspod.com. Please subscribe and leave us a rating. It really helps other people find the show. Thanks again for listening.
It's a rerun of a memory of you, and it's a pale imitation. Yeah, it's safer and it's cleaner